Hello everyone. So it's here in this 1 a.m. and the technical team is dancing behind the scenes. We are on Australian time and we are going to talk about Australian ecosystems, but also people based in Australia and working in the Indian Ocean. You may know that Australia hosts one of the most diverse and iconic marine ecosystem on the planet. Some people say everything wants to kill you in Australia, but I'm not sure. It ranges from tropical waters of the north to the cold temperate habitats in the southern coasts.
This session will highlight scientific research across ecosystems from coral reefs to marine megafauna.
Also, the role of people and indigenous protection, protected areas, community knowledge in shaping conservation outcomes.
Large-scale marine conservation initiatives and how they respond to climate pressures, offshore development, and biodiversity decline.
And as I said, also Australia's regional outreach, but also connection with research and conservation program extending into the wider Indian Ocean. For this session, we will hear from John Arnold, who is a researcher at Deakin University. So it's in Victoria, so in the southeast of Australia. So John is going to talk about the cold ecosystem and marine mammals living there. Steve Como, that some of you have already heard in the previous session, researcher at Sorbonne University in Villefranche-sur-Mer, used to work a lot in Australia for several years and used to work in the northwest of Australia, so on tropical ecosystems. John and Steve are not able to join us right now, so we have recorded an interview before a little bit earlier today. But we are lucky to have Bene with us. So Bene is the regional lead at Blue Nature Alliance in New South Wales, I think, in Australia. And Bene, you're working from Australia, but in the Indian Ocean. So let's start with you, Bene. Can you introduce yourself, your work, and I think you have also a little PowerPoint you can share.
Yes, thank you so much, Christophe. Thank you, Thomas, for inviting me. Are you sharing my slides?
Yeah, it's coming. It's here.
Yeah, hi. Yes, so I'm really happy to be joining you here today. I am Benny Agulto. I'm a Maris, proud Maris alumnus from the first batch of class 20. Original batch, yay. I'm currently the regional lead for the Blue Nature Alliance affiliated with Conservation International based in Sydney, Australia. So the Blue Nature Alliance is an ambitious global initiative working to accelerate the pace, scale, and effectiveness of ocean conservation through partnership. We were deeply inspired by the bold action of nations that were taking around the world to designate large-scale protections. And at the same time, we recognized that our pace in protection was not on track to deliver the world what the world needs, nor was the funding available anywhere close to sufficient. So the Blue Nature Alliance was set a goal that is commensurate with the scale of the challenge. So by working globally and in partnership, the Alliance seeks to secure the effective and equitable conservation of 5% of the global ocean, or 18 million square kilometers by 2027, thereby accelerating momentum towards the global goal of protecting 30% of the ocean by 2030. To give you a sense of scale, that is an area larger than the continent of South America, or 4 times the size of the European Union. So to do this, the Alliance provides a combination of flexible financial resources, technical expertise with a group of different people, different teams within the Blue Nature Alliance to provide all these different technical needs enable for the governments to enable the creation of large-scale MPAs, and also the thought partnership to support the work of both place-based and global partners. So, what I do as the regional lead is to look for opportunities for us to support government ambitions to protect large areas of their marine territories, most especially waters beyond 12 nautical miles. So this in most places, not just in Asia, not just in Australia, most of the areas that are being protected are very close to the coastal areas. So the concept of large-scale MPA is very new. in many regions. It has never been done before in Asia, for example, because of the inherent complexities and perceptions around management. So since 2022, when I joined Conservation International and Blue Nature Alliance, so we have been very successful in co-designing large-scale protections of offshore marine areas in the Philippines and Indonesia, particularly in Asia. We also supported the establishment and expansion of large areas of sub-Antarctic um, uh, regions in Australia, and also areas in the high seas, for example, the Southern Ocean, where Australia is very much involved in its designation and establishment. So yeah, so that's basically me. That's what we do, and that's what I do in the region. I can't hear you, Christophe. Cannot hear you.
Yeah, it's we waited 1 a.m. in the morning to forget the mute. You want to?
Yeah, I guess one of my kind of first questions for you, Bene, would be, what are some of the challenges with trying to implement these large-scale marine protected areas, and then also like why are they then so significant, and what can they, and like what is their value, like broadly conceived?
Yeah, let's answer the first question. I think the most important thing
Challenges
is
first.
significance. The significance. So of course, we know the benefits of MPAs, the coastal MPAs particularly. Although the challenging part there is that it does not encompass a bigger ecosystem, and we know marine species, they don't just stay in one place. In some of in most of the times, they actually go to different areas in the different part of their life cycle. And we also have migratory species, and we also have special areas out far from coastal areas, which are uh, uh, ecosystems or areas that are important in a particular life cycle of a species. Or this could be um, um, areas that are very productive. So when you talk about large scale areas, this is a minimum 100,000 square kilometers, depending really on which area we're talking about. So there is a big possibility of we are actually protecting large marine vertebrates. We are protecting areas in which they migrate. We're protecting areas that are highly productive, because these could be areas where seamounts are found, and we know the importance of seamounts, for example. Like in the case of the Philippines, our project is called the Philippine Rice Ocean Conservation Area. So this has 150,000 square kilometers of area, about 5% of the entire waters of the Philippines. And there we are protecting an underwater caldera, about 150 kilometers in diameter. This is a dormant underwater caldera volcano, and 5,000-meter deep. And this area is the only known spawning ground for yellowfin tuna in that part of the ocean. And if you're not going to protect that area, there won't be tuna that actually goes all the way up to Hawaii.
Everywhere else.
So yeah, so these are some of the important reasons why we need to go bigger in terms of protection.
But
going to your second question on challenges.
Because when we go bigger, it's also harder to
Yes.
control, to enforce, to manage, but
Exactly.
maybe cost more money. So how do we do that?
Yes, when we go bigger, that's actually correct, and we are talking about different stakeholders this time. When we are in the coastal areas, we know who we know the stakeholders. We know that these are coastal fishers, the communities that depend their livelihood on these areas that we want to protect. But when we go farther, we're talking about governments. What is there? What is the government's willingness to actually protect this? We need to build this ambition within the governments, because they will be the one who will be primarily protecting this area. They'll primarily be the one who will be managing this area. Aside from political willingness, we have to be able to maintain that. We also have to make sure that there is financing available. So we don't stop in just establishing this area. We also need to invest on making sure that these areas won't be a paper park in the future. So how do we actually do this? How do we invest on these areas? We need to train the management in terms of monitoring, for example, investment on use of technology, satellite technology in monitoring for illegal fishing and whatnot. So this is and another thing is that there's no one solution to all these sites. Each site is very unique. So we have to be very adaptable. We have to design a project that is suitable for the area, suitable on how this area is being utilized by the people and the objectives on having this protected area.
So what's the biggest challenge into all of that for you?
Biggest challenge is
Yeah.
maintaining government political will.
Because political will. Because it can be that you have I guess you need a strong political will at the beginning to create momentum.
And
but then the politics is changing with time. Yeah.
Exactly. Because when you talk about technology, we have satellite technologies that can monitor illegal fishing. We have satellite technology that can monitor biodiversity in the area. We have that established. But without political will, these things can change. Even if you lock in an area, say this is protected until, let's say, 2045, but then the government can just say no. We're just going to open this for international fishing license because this brings in money to the government, and that is happening at the moment.
Yeah, because just to make sure, here we're only talking about EEZ, so in the national jurisdiction of the country.
Yes. We're not even talking about the high seas, which is even more complicated. Yeah,
we'll wait for EEZ.
Yeah, we're just talking about 200 nautical miles. That's basically it. And this is still within the territory of a nation. So maintaining that political will is one of the things that is very, very important. When we talk about management, we have a lot of cases. We know how to do that. We talk about technology that will be used in monitoring these areas. We have that in place. Sustainable financing, this can be designed. There's a lot of, we have debt swap, for example. We have blue bonds, for example. This can be adopted to that.
Yeah.
But without political will, everything will just be, we just fall into pieces. So we need to maintain this. We have to make sure that there's a strong buy-in from the government and from the communities. Communities still, even though it's far, they are still.
What do you mean? Far from the community?
Far from the area, from the coast, far from the coast.
You need to connect that to their. You need to connect the value to the community.
Yes.
Yeah.
There are some areas, particularly in Pacific, for example, in Papua New Guinea, for example, in New Caledonia, for example, there is a strong connection between the people and to this area.
Even we talked about that in the last sessions.
About indigenous
around the Pacific. Yes.
Exactly. So how do you bring this connection together and make use of this in ensuring that the political will is maintained, not just at the beginning of the MPA establishment, but all throughout the lifespan of this MPA? And very, very important.
Thank you, Benny, for sharing that. So before we give the floor, these recorded interviews with Steve and John, you like to give a kind of a take-home message to the audience with what your work, what you think will be important?
So yeah, I would just probably say I would like to associate this with the global goal of international global goal of 30 by 30. So I would say that there are a lot of course criticisms, not just in coastal MPAs but large-scale MPAs. But I would say that these two things, they are complementary with each other. I'm not saying that coastal MPAs are this does not actually are help, but they are very helpful because this supports not just the biodiversity but also the lives of the people. But at the same time, the livelihood of the people. We get a lot of proteins from the sea. Without this, if you're not gonna protect this, we're just going to be losing this opportunity. But though much of the recent growth in MPA coverage has been driven by establishment of very large MPA per 100,000 square kilometers. Countries like USA, France, they're starting to protect their overseas territories. And these vast MPAs each contribute a significant part of the total global coverage, with the 20 large-scale MPAs making up majority of the world's marine protected area coverage. And a reminder that back in 2020, we set a target of 10% protection. We failed. We only achieved about 7%. And then now we are very ambitious that we want to jump to 30% of protecting the entire global oceans. And currently at 2025, we are at 8%. We have a long way to go. So we need everybody all governments, all people, everyone to actually contribute to this goal and really do a part where, however small this is, this actually contributes to the protection, because it is our future that is at stake here.
I'm sure that 30% by 2030 will be one big line at UNOC coming here this year.
Yes, exactly. And I'm going to UNOC in a couple of weeks to
Yes.
continue negotiations and discussions, track commitments by our government partners. And I'm looking forward to meeting you all. I've not met you for like 5 years, so I'm really looking forward to that. And hopefully we get more commitments from governments in protecting the oceans, and also putting in the financing needed to be able to do this.
Thank you, Bene. Thank you a lot. You are at UNOC. And so we are now going to share with you more stories of Steve Como, who worked for years in the northwest of Australia. He's going to talk about the specifics, really, of course, ocean acidification, his main studies, but also how it is to work in a place where it seems really everything tries to kill you: sharks, crocodiles, and jellyfishes. There are proofs. There are even all the material that has been bitten by crocodiles and sharks. So he's going to show that. And also John, who is going to talk about marine mammals and birds, so megafauna, from the southeast of Australia. And you're going to you will see at some point John running, chasing fur seals, which is quite big. Okay, thank you again, Bene.
Thank you.
Here we go with Steve first. You were with us. Sorry. Hi, Steve. Thank you for coming back for a second session. You were with us for the session in Hi, Steve. Thank you for coming back for a second session. You were with us for the session in Hi, Steve. Thank you for coming. We have different problems at more than 1 a.m. in the morning. So video with Steve is not working. We'll try John. Doing this 24-hour. Hi, John. Thanks for being with us during this 24-hour journey. So first, who are you, John?
Thank you, Christoph, for having me. My name is John Arnold. I'm a professor of marine ecology at Deakin University in Melbourne. I have been doing research on fur seals and seabirds and some cetaceans now for most of my career. I've travelled and worked in many parts of the world, but a large part of my career for the last 25 years or so has been working in Bass Strait, which is the region between mainland Australia and Tasmania. And it's a very important region because it is, if you like, the epicenter of the biodiversity and biomass of marine mammals and seabirds in Australia. It's also Southeastern Australia is where most of the human population exists. And it's also a region which is one of the fastest warming oceanic regions in the world. And we are already seeing changes to the environment as a consequence of that. And this is what will probably impact those seabirds and marine mammal species greatly over years to come.
So yes, maybe you have a dream job. I know you spent your career as a marine ecologist working on marine megafauna, marine mammals and birds. it can be a dream for a lot of our MARE students, alumni, and for more people around. So what does that look like, really? What does that actually look like day to day, from field work to lab time, grant work, writing, searching for money, project coordination? What's your day-to-day work?
Good question. Today, most of my work involves managing a team, the paperwork consequences. When I started out, it was all about convincing granting agencies to give me a little bit of money so I could do some research. And for many years, my research survived on the smell of an oily rag. Now, luckily, this last few years, I have had a lot of people, agencies, companies interested in the work we do with regards to the potential impacts on proposed wind farm developments in the region. There's also, governments and agencies want to know what's going to be the impact of these climate changes on these marine megafauna. But the process for doing research starts with you having an idea for a question, a project idea, which you have to turn into a proposal, whether it be for a granting agency, a government department, or a commercial entity that's going to give you the money. You have to sell your project ideas. Once that idea has been approved and you've got some money, then it's putting in for animal ethics approvals, which is more paperwork. And then you have to get government permission to do work on wildlife and potentially also get approval to do work on parklands and national park land, all that sorts of things. It's all the paperwork. Then there's all the logistics, which means, organising boats or helicopters to get to offshore islands, having all the safety equipment you need, all the animal capture techniques and equipment you need for that. The fun is, being amongst that wildlife. It's my first few years on some of the islands that I've worked at in Bass Strait. I was working on Australian fur seals for my postdoctoral fellowship. Every time I went out, I had about millions of ideas popping into my head for new projects. And I still sometimes sit out there on the islands and think, I wonder we can start getting some interesting studies where we look at intranational effects, environmental effects, so we can start modeling what impacts various species.
I wanted to go to that. Like, what's the most important result you have been able to find out with these studies over the last years of your career? Has been the most important for you, at least?
Was having 20 years of body mass and body condition data on Australian fur seals. We never bothered to look at it until a few years back. Oh, wow, there's been a massive decline in body condition in Australian fur seals in Bass Strait where I work. What's causing that? Big question mark. We've only just discovered it in the last few years. We can relate the internal variations to environmental signals, but it's got to mean that these animals are going to have to adapt somehow. Are they going to fall off the perch and the species will crash? No. I suspect that potentially the species in certain regions of their range are going to start producing smaller pups. And that'll have life history consequences for the species. That to me is a major thing. Most fun memory.
Almost unexpected.
Waking up in the morning, getting out of my tent and seeing a humpback whales breaching just offshore on one of the islands I was working at. No, can't complain when you see that on a Sunday morning.
On your field where you're alone on a small island just with your team for days.
Yeah, it was one of the islands off the east coast of Wilson's Promontory. A lot of juvenile humpback whales are there in winter. And having penguins come around the tent at night and call out to their partners and so forth, that's lovely. But I think one thing that's struck me recently is during the dark days of COVID, we were doing some work on cormorant colony, and we had our first time we'd ever worked at that colony. First time we'd done work on these animals, and we were putting out GPS trackers. We were getting the first data on the species, and at the other, long day of deploying GPS trackers on these birds, I went to the top of the island, to the colony, watched the sunset, and had these cormorants, just resting with their chicks in front of me. So that one of those Zen moments and thought, life is good. And so that's a memory that sticks by.
So you're talking about marine mammals and birds a lot, and coming back to marine mammals, maybe more especially with warming seas and shifting prey distributions due to warming seas and other issues. What do you think affects the most the behavior and the success of marine predators, the fitness, the main issues we can imagine in the future?
That's a big
and maybe
question.
also the type of studies you may want to.
Well, as I mentioned, we've noticed there's been a general decline in body condition of Australian fur seals, both in adult females and now also in adult males. We've got a paper in review in that regard. And it's just, clear distinction. So when I started working on these species in the late 90s, an average female Australian fur seal at my colony weighed 75, 80 kilos. She now weighs 65. That's a huge decrease in condition. What's driving that? Obviously, less food.
Mm-hmm.
To be able to say which food it is very hard because this species eats up to 50 or 60 different prey species. And individuals will specialize on different types of prey. So it gets very difficult to identify that. But that's one of the things that we're trying to understand. What's driving these changes over time? Obviously, it has to be potentially due to climate change, because we know that the southeastern Australia is warming. The East Australia current is getting stronger. Don't migrate anymore in winter. We used to have our colonies completely bare in winter. Birds are here all year round now, which means what? Which means there's more food available for all those species. So climate change may not be all doom and gloom. It may be for some bad, but others it could be good. We have a hard time understanding that, and we are still scratching the surface of a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot
of work to be done. There'll be plenty of work long after I've gone for the next generation of marine
to understand how the food web will be fully affected.
Yes.
Let's talk about the job market. For years, I heard that it was not possible to be a marine ecologist working on marine mammals. You are one, and now you're telling us that you have a lot of work with the environmental impact assessment related to the development of offshore wind energy.
Personally, I'm all for renewable energy, and if we have to create some offshore wind farms to get this, I'm for it. It'll be a good thing as long as we properly plan for it, as long as we fully understand the impacts on various species. The big one everyone's concerned about is collision risk of birds flying into the blades, etc. That's stuff that we have to study. And that's what sort of research that we're doing to provide the raw data for the modelers to look at that. We've been doing a lot of tracking of animals in the region for that. Because of that increase in the interest for offshore wind farms, there's now seems to be a lot of jobs for young graduates to go off and do this sort of data collection, analysis, and so forth, so there are various things. We do have suspicion that for some species, all this seafloor infrastructure and equipment will be beneficial, because it may form artificial reefs, which some of these animals will feed on. So on one hand, you've got potential risk of disturbance, animals avoiding potential wind farms because of the blades and so forth, or the noise, or whatever. On the other hand, you've got potential for new habitats for seafloor feeding species, artificial reefs and so forth, while at the same time, the benefit of renewable energy.
Good. So your studies are, of course, really important to better understand the science of the organisms, but they also help for policymakers. So a lot of our students, a lot of our MARE students, they really like this work between science and policy. How do you see that? Do you work a lot with policymakers, or you are simply giving us the result of your work?
I prefer to provide the information and let the policymakers do the policies. I tend not to delve into that. I'll leave that for the policymakers. It's not my area of interest per se. I probably don't have the patience for it, I don't think. I rather just do the science and hand across the information. A lot of my work is advising agencies, government agencies and so forth. They ring me up and say, what about this? What about that? I give my professional opinion. But do I want to be someone who does an environmental impact statement? No, that's not my work. I provide the data for someone else to do that. Okay.
Thank you, John. We can conclude maybe on if you have some advices you would like to give to our MarRes community and to all people watching you today.
Is that, well, our oceans are a valuable resource. We have to look after them, but first we have to understand them. And so we need to do more investment in understanding the oceans, largely because they are very important for our, food resources, our transport, and potentially our energy sources for the future. And so that's what we need to do. At the same time, if people are interested in marine environments and marine science, all I can say is be hungry, work hard, and careers will come.
Thank you, John, for this few minutes with us and sharing your experience in the southeast of Australia.
You're welcome.
So we're back here in the studio, and hopefully, the last segment of this session is an interview with Steve Como, as promised. Thank you for coming back for a second session. You were with us for the session in Arctic. We are going on the other side of the world now, and reflecting back on your experience in Australia, in the northwest of Australia in particular. You were in the Kimberleys. So, Steve, can you introduce yourself a little bit, and then we're going to Kimberleys.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Steve Como. I'm a marine biologist working in Villefranche-sur-Mer in the south of France. And so I'm right now working mostly in polar areas, but before that, in another life, I was working in Australia. I was a research fellow in Australia for 3 years, and I was particularly working in the northwestern region of Australia, in the Kimberley region, to look at coral reefs that are pretty interesting in this region because they're exposed to very unique conditions.
So here we go. What were you doing there?
So there, so my main research was to try to understand the response of corals to climate change, and particularly to ocean acidification. So we're trying to understand the mechanisms by which corals calcify and why their calcification is affected by changes in pH. And for that, we found some reefs in the Kimberley regions that are very interesting. Those reefs, those reefs are exposed to very large tides. So at low tides, those reefs are above the mean seawater level. And on those reefs, there's also a lot of life, a lot of organisms living there, a lot of seagrass, a lot of algae, also corals. And all this biological biomass, all these organisms, they tend to modify the chemistry of the water. During the day, there is a lot of photosynthesis, so the pH of the water will go up because the CO2 is drawn down by photosynthesis. And at night, there's a lot of respiration and the pH will go down.
So it's what we see on the little graph at the same time.
Exactly, it's what we see on this graph. And because of that, the organisms experience some very large range of pH. pH goes up to almost 9 during the day and goes down to like 7.5, 7.4 at night. And those levels are pretty extreme for a coral reef. Just to put it back into the context, the pH in the ocean, the mean pH is about 8.1. And the pH expected by the end of the century, because of ocean acidification, pH will go down, and we expect a pH around 7.7, 7.8. So those corals live in water where sometimes the pH is even lower than what we'll expect at the end of the century. So for us, sorry?
And they survive.
And they survive, they grow,
thrive.
they are pretty happy. But we don't find only corals, we also find coralline algae on those in these reefs. This is also interesting because coralline algae are known to be pretty sensitive to ocean acidification. But despite that, they are growing and they are pretty happy on those reefs. So we wanted to understand a little bit why they can grow on those reefs, which kind of cellular mechanisms, which kind of calcification mechanisms they have that allow them to grow in those conditions.
And so what's the main result more impactful for you?
Well, I think the main result is that we still have a lot of questions, I would say. But the main result is that it seems that it's really this big variability in pH that help them to deal with those conditions. When we're exposing those corals to low pH, but very constant low pH, they were very affected by those conditions. They had like a very low growth rate. But when we expose them to those low pH conditions and we add variability on it, it seems to really help them to deal with those conditions. So it shows that it's not always easy when we look at ocean acidification. It's not like only the mean pH that matters, but also the variability in pH.
Okay. So you're hopeful for the future?
Well, at least we see that some corals can deal with those conditions. Some coralline algae also. We have seen, we did some experiment on those coralline algae, and notably we did the experiment over several generations, and we showed that after several generations in the lab under low pH, they were able to show some sign of acclimation, and they were able to grow better under the low pH after several generations. So this is a good sign, like showing that maybe some organisms will be able to deal with low pH.
Yeah, I was smiling asking you the question because we are all around the world passing through multiple time zones where we are talking about coral reef and of course bleaching, and hope is a recurring question. We can maybe finish on the last point. Being a scientist in this region is, I guess, a bit or challenging and or fun, I hope. So can you tell us a few things that were fun?
Yeah,
afterwards.
Fun afterwards and challenging. Well, the wildlife in this area is always pretty interesting. Each time we go in the water, we feel that everything wants to kill us. I mean, with bunch of sharks, crocodiles in these areas, blue ring octopus, box jellyfish. So a bunch of like very poisonous or dangerous organisms.
Is it true that you had to wear sometimes full wetsuits for the jellyfish?
Yeah. When we walk on the reef, we always have to be covered for the jellyfish. And then, it creates some difficult conditions. Of course, it's difficult to go on the reef at night, for example, to do some measurements because we're afraid of mostly the crocodiles. But then we're to deploy some instruments that we leave on the reef at night. The problem is that those instruments were a good, some toys, something fun for the crocodiles, for the sharks to play with.
Is it what we see on the picture then?
Exactly, it's what we see on the pictures. And almost every morning we're finding our instruments just completely destroyed and with a bunch of like bite mark on them. And so it was pretty challenging to get night measurements. But we still got few measurements and pretty interesting ones.
Maybe to conclude, really, you were in a region with traditional knowledge and local people. And so have you walked with the people living there, and have them help you to walk there, especially as you say that the conditions were challenging?
Yes, we're always working with them. So those the islands, the lands where we work, they were like traditionally old lands. So we had to go with like the local population, someone like a representative from the local population each time we're going on the reef. It was always interesting because they had a different approach than us. So I was telling you about all the stuff that can kill us. For them, they didn't see any danger. They were just going with flip-flops on the reefs, and they were like, oh, it's fine. Everything is safe. There's no risk there. They were just fishing there, swimming there. So it's a very, very different approach. And they are very, they know the environment way better than us. So that they knew exactly where they can go very safely. And we knew a bit less.
So just following their feet.
Yeah, exactly. It was always good to follow them. They go first, and we just follow them, follow their lead.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And so that concludes this 16th session on Australian ecosystems and outreach. And so it means that next session will be in Japan, Taiwan, and China. And it's approaching fast in less than 30 minutes at 2 a.m. You there?
Yeah.
Are you taking a nap?
I'm taking that.
Okay.